All right. So as Kate just noted, Sam and I are going to be presenting to you today on a project that an idea we have to examine an holistic public defense office here in Douglas County, kind of framing it as a university community partnership. And I know you just got like really quick introductions, but Sam, I'll give you some time to introduce yourself, and then I'll go a little bit into mine, and then we'll move on to the rest of the presentation.
All right. Thanks so much for having me. I'm the executive director of Kansas Holistic Defenders. I've been a public defender for most of my legal career. We started taking cases in February of last year, and we'll explain what that means, what it means to have a public defender's office, what it means to be holistic. But bottom line is, you don't know anything else when the cops tell you, oh, if you don't have an attorney, or you can't afford one will be provided for you. Well, that's us.
Exactly. And my name is Josh. Again, I'm a MPH PhD student here at KU. I'm also a board member with Kansas Holistic Defenders. So our plan really was sort of like a serendipitous or like something that just kind of showed up one day. Sam and I were talking, and he had this idea to evaluate the Kansas Holistic Defenders and their impact on client outcomes in the misdemeanor cases, because those are the cases that they take. And he's like, hey, there's a couple of grant proposals or requests for proposals that I've seen. Like, what do you think about these? Like, do you think we would have any chance of getting this? And I said, well, I am taking a grant writing class this fall, and the semester-long project is to come up with a grant proposal. So how about I just do that for the class, and then we can move on from there. So we want to conduct a formal evaluation of KHD's impact on client outcomes. And there's, I think, two ways that that's really important. One is going to inform KHD's internal practices, right? Because they want to engage with their clients in the most effective way that they can. And also, I think that it will be a contribution to the literature. We'll get into this a little bit, but holistic defense is a pretty understudied model of defense. And also, I think it could potentially inform other offices around the country. Sam?
Yeah, so the stakes here are very real. So our office is assigned to represent folks who are charged with misdemeanors, it's the lowest level of offenses. However, misdemeanors are sort of understudied and under-resourced because people are like, oh, well, just minor crimes, who cares? Well, everyone who's got a criminal record that's long once had no criminal record, and most of those folks at their first criminal record be some sort of minor offense. And the handling of this, both how the four corners of what happens in the courtroom on that case, but also the destabilizing effects of that case can have lifelong ramifications for folks. And we're also in a county where there are immense racial and ethnic disparities in our legal system, a jail that is overflowing disproportionately with Black and Indigenous folks. And so fixing misdemeanors is one area where we believe that we can make a difference, and that was something that we founded to the office to address. So we're very interested in our outcomes, not only just being efficacious and effective for poor and working class people who are charged with misdemeanors, but especially our belief that this type of defense practice can push back against some of the horrible racial disparities that we see in Douglas County. So as to who we are, most people would expect that a place like Lawrence would have already had a public defender's office. Before we got started, we didn't. What existed before was a system of private, for-profit, usually solo practicing attorneys being assigned cases without really kind of any sort of oversight to make sure that they were really fighting for their clients. And so some attorneys would and do a great job, some attorneys wouldn't. And so our office was founded as part of the county's efforts to reduce the jail population, improve justice system outcomes, reduce recidivism, and a variety of other issues. So we were founded starting in 2021 as a nonprofit. We received a contract from Douglas County to start taking misdemeanor cases starting in February of 2022, and we're going on our second year as an office now. In order to address the need for a public defender's office, there's not one here. You would expect the state or the county would have already provided that. They didn't. So we started a nonprofit to fill that need. As I mentioned, we take misdemeanors. We're the first office of our type, basically all across Kansas. Even now, virtually all misdemeanors are handled by private appointed counsel. Doing just misdemeanors, we're also the first office that's founded on the holistic model. And as Josh said, as a board member, the conversation is about where are we getting money and what can we get funding to do. The research question comes up because we are not a state entity, we're a nonprofit, and have a variety of grants and projects that we're pursuing as part of our work to serve clients. The holistic model is based on the idea that just focusing on the four corners of a client's case and what happens in the courtroom is not enough, right? Like you can win someone's case at trial, but if they're still homeless when they get out of jail, then what have you really done, right? Just paying attention to the case and not the employment consequences, the consequences for the family regulatory system, immigration consequences, all of these things we label under collateral consequences, are often much more harsh than the actual penalty that somebody is facing as part of their misdemeanor case. So our office and this model is an interdisciplinary model that involves client advocates, investigators, and us liaising with other community providers to get at some of those collateral consequences of an offense, not just stopping at the courtroom. So a really good example of this is this story here. We picked up a case where an individual had been in jail for months and months. He, during that time, had asked his then appointed attorney, well, can you make a bond modification? And the attorney said, no, you'll never get it. You've failed to appear in the past, etc. That attorney ended up withdrawing. We got put on the case. Within a day, we had gone to the court and said, hey, this is a low-level case. We believe that we can get this resolved. Pretrial detention is not helping here. We think there's a better way. The judge ended up listening to that argument, released him on pretrial monitoring with a GPS monitor. Then the other half of the work began, because where was he going to go? So getting a spot at the shelter in Douglas County, which is frequently overcrowded, was no easy task, but we were able to leverage some connections there and get him a bed at the shelter. As with many service providers, you'll find that like what is accessible on paper is not actually what happens. So there was a hidden barrier here where they said, okay, we don't take people who are on GPS monitors. So we had to ask if they would make an exception while we go back to the court to see if we could get a form of monitoring that didn't involve GPS. And they said, okay, well, he also needs a vaccine. So one of the attorneys and our advocate went down to the Walgreens, booked a COVID vaccine, got him vaccinated, and then we were able to continue working with him through that case, getting that case ultimately resolved, getting him connected to benefits and a more permanent form of housing as the case progressed. And so that's kind of what the wraparound interdisciplinary model looks like. And you can see why a solo attorney who's just an attorney who doesn't have that staff, doesn't have that training, wouldn't be able to do those things. And we believe, we know intuitively, it makes a big difference for folks, and it makes our work in the court more effective. But there's obviously as scientists, a difference between having a very strong hypothesis and having proof. And that's where I'm going to turn it over to you, Josh.
Yes, thank you, Sam. So as Sam was just talking about, like those are services that would not be able to be provided otherwise. And like he said, intuitively, we think that that's going to make a really big difference in the lives of these clients. But we want to be able to study that. So we want to be able to quantify what those differences look like. And also from a qualitative perspective, hear from the clients themselves what sort of a difference that makes in their life. So we want to, the proposed studies compare the differential effects of this holistic public defense model with the court-appointed counsel, which is the private model Sam was talking about earlier, on client outcomes in the misdemeanor cases in Douglas County. So we think this is a pretty rigorous test of the holistic defense model. And we're also able to take advantage of a natural experiment in Douglas County, which is really fortuitous. So what that looks like is we have this like really clean, neat natural experiment where prior to February of 2022, KHD was not taking clients, right? They started taking clients in February through middle of August. They were taking clients, then there were some staffing changes. So they weren't able to take clients for about a 6-week span. So it's sort of like a return to baseline, right? And the appointed attorneys were again taking cases. And then again, at the end of September, KHD was taking all of the cases on the docket. So like I said, it's a pretty neat experiment. You can think of it as like a interrupted time series or like an ABAB, but it controls for some threats to validity, and I think hopefully will produce some pretty strong results. So this here is a pretty simplified diagram of what happens, right? But basically, so we have our intervention or treatment, which would be clients going to KHD. On the top, the light blue bar, on the bottom, darker blue bar, that's like baseline control. That would be the appointed attorney. So a case is assigned to either KHD or to the private attorney. This middle piece here, KHD attorneys appear with their clients at their bail hearing, which we think is a pretty important aspect. There's some consequences that flow from that. That's not the case when, or has not been the case when clients are appointed an attorney. Then there's also the multidisciplinary team that works with the client to meet their legal and the collateral consequences of involvement. And as Sam mentioned, when you're an appointed attorney, they're working by themselves. They don't have the capacity to engage in that way. And then the outcomes, right, their case adjudication and disposition. So outcomes of interest, right? We're wanting to know, do the clients experience differences in their case outcomes? So dismissals, diversions, time spent in jail, like really important, impactful consequences for their lives, both in the immediate term and long term. Do clients experience differences in collateral consequences? So things like license revocations or loss of employment. And one of the ways that KHD sort of seeks to reduce these sorts of consequences is through losing the
Client
words.
advocates.
Thank you. The client advocates that they employ. Thank you very much. And finally, it was right there on the next bullet point. What impact do the client advocates have on client outcomes and experiences in terms of like service referrals and things like that? So really quickly, I know we're short on time. Sam will blitz through some preliminary data, and then we have a few next steps that I'll touch on.
There's a variety of data that I think show our efficacy. One of the pieces that we're most proud of is our dismissal rate. So between diversions and dismissals, most KHD clients do not end up at the end of their case with anything more on their criminal record than they started with. There is a total dismissal of all charges in roughly about 59% of the cases. And you can see also that relative to our baseline, so 23% of our clients are Black, but 42% of the dismissals of cases are for Black clients. I think this is because Black people are more likely to be falsely accused of crimes that really zealous litigation ends up resulting in a dismissal, which is one of the ways that we solve some of the racial disparities in the system. And this talks about, the rates of dismissal and diversion, both of which result in a dismissal of charges at the end of the case versus cases that plead out, which is a minority of the total cases that we handle. Additionally, there's lots of data about this, but we track the service goals that our client advocates are able to accomplish with clients. I believe we had an 83% rate of one or more of those goals being met through service provision. And Josh, we can keep on blitzing here.
Yep. Thank you, Sam. So like I said, that was really preliminary data, but the documentation system that KHD uses allows for like a really high definition and in-depth examination of everything they're doing. So next steps, finding a university partner to submit the grant with. I am not a PhD or not yet a PhD. So being the primary investigator on a grant is not really an option for me right now. So we're sort of wanting to explore options there and just talk to interested parties, basically. formalizing and submitting the grant proposal to different funding agencies. There are several, a lot of people, private funds like to give money to offices like SAM's because it looks good for them to give money to offices that are doing things to reduce racial disparities in the justice system. And then finally, some qualitative data collection as well. Like I said, we want to hear from the clients themselves what their experiences were like. And that's all we have for you today. But if there are any questions, like Kate said, we'll get to them a little bit later. But also, I can send my email in the chat if anyone wants to reach out. Thank you very much.